begin to the last of our series for the Black Lunch and Learn series for Black History Month with Swope Health. We have our last attendee, the Honorable Congressman Emanuel Cleaver. Welcome, Congressman Cleaver. Welcome to the Swope Health Black History Lunch and Learn series.
Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here with you.
We are so grateful to have you here with us today and learn a little bit about you and about your career. I know a lot of people know about you. You've been around Kansas City a long time, from your time as a pastor and as mayor of the city, the first African-American mayor of the city, and a longtime councilman, and now as our congressman. And folks who have tuned in before know our format. You're going to give a sort of a TED talk for about 10 to 15 minutes about your life and how you came to Kansas City and how you got started in politics and some of your challenges and accomplishments that you've done. And then we'll take some questions from myself, and we'll take some questions from the chat and just have a very lighthearted discussion. So Congressman Cleveland, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here with you. I was born in Texas, in my grandmother's kitchen, on the kitchen counter. And it was about a 26-minute drive from the center of downtown Dallas. We lived in a community called Waxahachie, and I grew up in poverty. It was a weird kind of a situation because I began my whole life living in a lot of poverty because my mother decided not to go to college and marry my father. So they got married like when she was 18 years old. And my father had gone to Prairie View and had gotten certified as a cleaner, a laundry person. So he opened up his own business. But if you live in Waxahachie, then and now, and if you can only do business with African Americans, you're not going to do much business. So we had to move, which I hated because I loved the place where I was born, because that's where my family was. My grandpa, Henry Barton, was white, and my grandmother was Harriet, was African American, and we, my oldest sister and I would be with him almost every day. He had 17 children, and my grandmother was one of them. So I hated to leave all the people that I grew up with until the age of 7. We moved to Wichita Falls, Texas. Went to high school there. I found out there that I knew how to do a couple of things in sports, so I ended up playing football. Had a very good career in football and a mediocre career in track, but I was captain of our team. I was recruited to go to college. I went to Morris State College with plans to play for the Cowboys, and it ended up with my best friend and I, the man who eventually was the best man at my wedding, Tommy Nelson. We were the two linebackers, and we were going to play for the Cowboys together. I ended up getting severely injured. I've since had 13 surgeries as a result of my football career. So I had to quit playing football and left Morris State and went to Prairie View. I did try to play in Prairie View. I cut myself when I realized I was just not equipped anymore physically to play the sport. And maybe one of the best things that happened to me, because I would hate to spend a lot of time running around trying to catch on with some kind of professional team. And my friend did go on to get drafted by the Cowboys, Tommy Nelson, but he only lasted for, I think, half a year. So my senior year, a man by the name of Don Blakely, who was in the personnel department at what was called Bendix, came to Prairie View's campus to recruit African Americans to work at Bendix in Kansas City, Missouri, which is now called Honeywell. And I was recruited come to work at Bendix. So I had a car that couldn't go in reverse. It was a Fairlane 500 Ford, but we pieced it together, and I never did learn how to turn the flywheel so it would back up. So I had literally no ability to go in reverse. And so I came here and started working at Bendix, and met a few people when I first came here, and decided that this might be an okay place. And eventually I became interested in politics, and in 1979 for the 1980 city council race, I ran for city council. This was when Bruce R. Watkins ran for mayor, so we ran at the same time, and so I was elected to the city council, and that was my first of 3 terms. And then I'm leaving a lot out because prior to that, I enrolled in the St. Paul School of Theology and worked toward a Master's of Divinity. So I had a bachelor's degree in social work and a master's in theology or divinity. And then having run for the city council and won the 5th district seat, served there, as I mentioned, 12 years, and then followed in the footprints of Bruce Watkins, and decided to run for mayor. And I don't think very many people put bets on me winning. For a lot of reasons. One reason is that my opponents had a lot of money. He started out with $1 million, and he was given a lot of money by the business community. And so, I can remember the headlines in the Star, "Where is the Cleaver campaign?" I mean, I had $138 in the bank, and my wife told me that if I won, I wouldn't have to pay her back. So that was about it in terms of the money. But we won the primary, and then the money started coming in, and I won and was successful and had the opportunity to run and win a second time. So that's kind of a brief history, and I can respond to questions and probably stretch out some of the things I've said already.
Well, Congressman, it's interesting that you mentioned that your time on the council, because I don't know if you were aware that I had done some archival work for Freedom, and it's actually in the Bruce Watkins Museum upstairs now. And I want to show you this, something I think you might appreciate. Let's see if I can share this with you. And if you can see that, that is
Oh my goodness,
a young Emanuel Cleaver poster that I found when you were running for city council. You had a little bit more hair and had a little sideburn going there. As it says, a candidate who is currently working for the community and for the people. So I thought you might appreciate this. I found this for you.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I haven't seen that in a couple of decades or longer. But yeah, I ran for the council. I ran with the Freedom Incorporated as a member of Freedom Incorporated, and I think I had 2 or 3 opponents, and I ran against one of the labor leaders. So all of organized labor was with my opponent, but that's the only race I've ever had where I didn't have the full support of organized labor. Bill Richardson was my opponent, and it was not a nasty campaign. We had a good campaign, and became good friends and worked together on a number of projects over the years before he retired.
And it's interesting you talk about your time in politics, Congressman, because one of the things that I noted in doing this research, and I can bring this up to you too, is that Kansas City is unique in the fact that we were sort of ahead of our time with regard to, I know you talk about Bruce Watkins, even though he ran for mayor but didn't win, but he came close. And you became our first Black mayor in 1991. And prior to that, you had Alan Wheat, which was our first Black congressman. And then you look today, we've now had three African American mayors, yourself, Sly James, and now Quentin Lucas. We now have had two African American congressmen, Alan Wheat and yourself. Now have a Black county executive with Frank White. We have a Black sheriff with Darryl Forte. And so it appears that, we as a city have been ahead of our time for some time with regard to elected Black leadership. And I found this as well, and an old archive, something else I think you would appreciate. You probably have not seen this for some time too. If I'll share this with you, this was in Ebony magazine in November of 1980. They were covering Kansas City. And as you look, there are some of the elected Black leaders, yourself, Bill Curls, Mary Bland, Alan Wheat, Charles Hasley. And so this was even in the 1980s, the coverage of our city and our Black leadership, from business to politics to education. It's very unique in terms of our city. And I think sometimes we don't get credit for that. And this was something else we found, that even early on, we had sort of gotten a national look at that. And I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit, Congressman.
Yes, I remember this. Ebony magazine, they sent in reporters and photographers that followed us around and took photographs of us at meetings. I don't think many of the young people around Kansas City are aware of the fact that when we came along, that crop of African Americans, we were doing things that were not being done anywhere else in the country. And we had people in positions of political leadership that were not in such positions elsewhere. For example, St. Louis had more than 50% of the Black population 10 or 15 years before I ran for mayor. But we elected an African-American mayor here before St. Louis elected Freeman Bosley, a good friend of mine. But we had superintendents of schools, we had the newspaper that helped us get to where we were trying to go, in the Kansas City Call newspaper. That was the only one we had at the time. Alex Harris was leading the contractors who were trying to do business. Bruce R. Watkins and Leon Jordan. Leon had died. Leon had been murdered, had been assassinated down on Prospect. My son has done a documentary I'd encourage people to watch, because it gives the whole story about Leon Jordan and how the mafia struggled with whether or not they were going to allow a hit on him or not. But he was killed in front of his business, the Green Duck down on Prospect. But we were doing great things in the Missouri General Assembly, and and then we had business. I have a photograph of Ed Gates with George Gates and his sisters. We thought at the time that we were eons ahead of most of the other cities in the Midwest, and the reason we thought that is because we were. And it wasn't due to me, it was due to the work of people like Leon Jordan, Bruce Watkins. We had Harold Holliday Sr., who was in the state Senate at the time. And those leaders guided us and pushed us. We had individuals who were brilliant strategists and politicians. Bruce was one of them. And Bruce had no college education, but Leon Jordan told me one time that Bruce was born a natural politician. And that's one of the reasons when I was able to secure money to do the South Midtown Roadway, I proposed that we name it Bruce R. Watkins, and the council. This is when I was mayor. The council said yes, and so that's how we got the name. I called Bruce Watkins Jr. His brother Robbie had died a little bit earlier, and so Bruce was the only family member around, the only child. And so he gave me permission to name it to Bruce R. Watkins. And Bruce did a lot for this community, and hopefully we can remember him very fondly and appreciatively.
So, Congressman, take me, you were in your third term on the city council. Take us to at the point you decided to run for mayor, how you came to that decision. Tell us about the race and how you eventually won. Because at that point, but in 1991, we had not ever had an African-American mayor. We had a good trial with Bruce Watkins. How do you come to the decision that you're going to run, give up your council seat and do this? And what does the race look like, in terms of who your opponents are? But also, do what is the dynamics of that race that you eventually do win?
Well, first of all, I was fortunate enough at that time to still enjoy the leadership and counsel of people like Harold Holliday Sr., who was still around. He was retired, but he was still active in the community. Of course, Bruce had died. Leon had been assassinated, but we had a lot of other people. Phil Curls was very active at the time, and eventually rose to become the president of Freedom Incorporated. And he was a master politician, and following in the footsteps of Leon Jordan and Bruce Watkins. We still had Rosemary Loeb still here. She had been around with Freedom from the very beginning. And I was fortunate. Satchel Page's family were members of our church, and I had a relationship with Satchel, who was very helpful to me. A lot of people were helpful, but I was running against a juggernaut, Bryce Harris. Bryce Harris had been the chancellor of the Metropolitan Community College System, and some of the chamber types said, we want a mayor who can run the city, and we don't need all of this social and social activism and talk about justice and all this stuff. And so they raised $1 million for him, and then bought him suits and the whole deal. And it turned out that when we went to started campaigning, the public was just infuriated that some corporate leaders had decided to buy the mayoral seat. And so I benefited from that, because these were not just African Americans. White Kansas Cityans were just outraged that there was an attempt to buy the seat. And so they came over and supported me. Ewing Kaufman, who owned the Kansas City Royals, Marion Laboratories founding CEO, was also one of the people who were angry, who was angry. And so he became one of my biggest supporters. And I received so much counsel of course, the Black community turned out in huge numbers. And I was able to win. Nobody thought that could happen. I mean, there are a lot of people, I've run into even white business people now who say, well, we knew you were going to win. The only person who really said that was Dick Berkeley. He told me, that he knew I was going to win. And I think he also helped make that possible by making me the mayor pro tem, which gave me another level of visibility. And then my friend Ollie Gates was the co-chair of my campaign with Jim Nutter. And Ollie's closest friend, lifelong friend, Bruce Watkins, had died, and Ollie had put everything he had into getting Bruce elected. And so they shared the campaign. They directed the campaign, and it had to be an almost perfect campaign to win. Now you don't need to run a perfect campaign if you're African American. Back then you did, and I'm glad that we don't have to do it anymore, because it's very difficult to pull off. but I had two co-chairs, and then I had the support of organized labor. I had the support of the Black community, and back then, not the ministers in Kansas City were the most influential individuals in the city, and they if they got behind you or again you, as we would say that in Texas, it was going to be impactful. And so the ministers turned out in just unbelievable numbers. They worked with me, they marched with me, they did everything they could. Wallace Hartsfield was prominent in that campaign, as was Reverend A.L. Johnson of Zion Grove Missionary Baptist Church. And it happened because of a lot of other people who got behind me. I'll never say that I had what it took to win because, as I mentioned earlier, I had hardly any money. We did end up with more money in the general election than we could even spend, and that was due to Ollie Gates and Jim Nutter. And I appointed Ollie Gates the African American to chair the park board in Kansas City, and he did a magnificent job. I could go and talk about all of the things that most people don't even know how they got where they are or why they are there. Due to Ollie Gates, I appointed Reverend Hartsfield as the chair of the municipal court because we only had one African American judge in the municipal court, and so I said, the way the system works, when there's a vacancy, that committee replaces the vacancy, and Reverend Hartsfield, he said, "Look, I don't want to get you in trouble." He said, "But how many black people do we want to get?" He said, "All we can get. I mean, all that can fit into the courtroom." So we were able to do that. So I appreciated them. I have nothing but praise for the community for getting me in office.
So talk to me about once you get in, you are a new mayor, and I know you are bombarded because people think that you can just snap your finger and fix everything because they've elected the first Black mayor. And I know that's challenging. I know there's some parallels, kind of like when we elect the first Black president, right? Do you think you can just solve everything like that?
Yes.
Once you are in office, how do you balance, I'm sure, the need that you have your priorities versus all the other priorities. Plus, you have to deal with the council, right? Because we don't have a strong mayor here. So you have to deal with a council and 13 other mini mayors, right? And so,
Yes.
and how did you balance all that? Because you had on your council some very strong-minded people, Charles Hasley, Carol Cole. You had to deal with some strong-minded individuals that were not sheep per se. So how did you balance all of that?
Well, Charles Hasley actually was a victim of term limits. Okay. He and Bobby Hernandez were actually the targets of it. They wanted to get rid of those two individuals when they put it on the ballot. The business community and a lot of anti-freedom outsiders of our community. They hated freedom because freedom had been successful. But I did have a strong council, but I decided to do some things that allowed me to organize the council in a way that the Kansas City Star became infuriated. The reason was in my 8 years, I lost one election. Actually, one vote. The one vote never took place, but I just say I lost it, but because I was trying to get a judge in who the Star was opposed to, Byron Fox, and so we couldn't get him in because all of the editorials every day, cartoons and so forth. So I just dropped it and considered that a loss. But I had a good mayor, a good council. I had people who worked with me and said we're gonna remain friends, and those who were not friends, we were going to become friends. And so I created, first mayor to create a cabinet. And so we had cabinet meetings in my office every Thursday at 12 noon. We had lunch. The media had an office next to the mayor's office, and I shut it down and gave them some rooms on another floor and converted what used to be the headquarters for the media into the mayor's dining room. And so, George Blackwood, finance chair. We had Ken Backus, the chair of public of the CDBG housing and urban development. He did that chair. I had Jeannie Robinson early on as finance, and then we started meeting. And so what I did is ask everybody, what do you want? What are your goals for being on the council? And we're going to get everybody's goals met, not just mine. And then we started down the line. For example, we had one member who said, I want to do a Midtown project. And I said, okay, then let's put it on paper what you want to get. And so what people see now as Costco's and all the little stores around that area, 31st and Main, that was a result of somebody saying they wanted to do a Midtown program. That area for the young people, they may not know, that area, there were lines of bookstores that sold sexual information, that were nude restaurants. It was
I think we understand what you mean, Reverend.
Yes. So anyway, so we had to buy all that stuff and move it, and then so now we have the Midtown development. And when people realized that everybody was going to have an opportunity to do what they wanted to do, it just created a high level of support among council members for me.
Mm-hmm. Now, like taking some questions from the chat, Congressman, some of the questions that are out there. One of them is, how did you balance your political position with your position in ministry as a pastor? How did you balance that?
Yeah, now that was very tough. That was I have to admit, that was very, very tough. When Senator Warnock was considering running, he called me on the phone, running for the United States Senate down in Georgia. He called me on the phone and said, should I do this? And I said, yes, you should do it, but you need to understand that this is going to be, you're going to work harder now than you have or ever will in your life, because running Ebenezer Baptist Church and trying to be in the Senate at the same time is just enormously difficult. So when I ran, what I did is I brought in a guy named Bo Mason, Henry Bo Mason from Marshall, Texas. He had played for the Kansas City Monarchs. In fact, he was Satchel Paige's roommate. They called, and he had gotten picked up by the Philadelphia Phillies at one point. They called him in baseball. They changed his name and called him Fireball. And he became my associate and did a fabulous job. But then there were people like Herb Hardwick was the chair of our church council, and Robert Sylvan was the lay leader. In other words, we had to have lay people who would say, who said to me, Rev, you go and do the mayor stuff. We're going to take care of all the administrative things in the church. And so we just had a policy. I would go out and do meetings on any night except on Wednesday nights. I would do Bible study, and then I wouldn't accept engagements on preaching out of town because I wanted to make sure I spent that time at the church. So we had a good staff at the church, and then the lay people did an enormously good job. Archie Welch, for example, was the chair of our trustee board. He's still not here in Kansas City and now in his 80s, but he was able to, we built a new church and raised the money while I was in the mayor's office. So I couldn't have done that. People give me credit for it, but it was these lay people who did all that work. People like Alice Ellison and Donna Wilson, who lives in Atlanta now.
Reverend Cleaver, affordable housing is always an issue, and it's an issue that you've seen now more as we talk about gentrification. How do you feel about redistricting in Kansas City as gentrification becomes a growing issue and continues to impact affordable housing? What do you think needs to be done to protect sort of economic stability among low-income families?
Well, I was looking around in the office. If I know we're going to talk about housing, I would hold up a picture of the house that we lived in when I was first born. I never did live in a house that had electricity or indoor plumbing until I was 7. Then we moved into public housing, and my father worked to get enough money to buy his own home. We moved out of public housing when I was 14. And so when I was elected to Congress, I had no aspiration for becoming a speaker or the whip or the majority leader or anything. I wanted to become the chair of the housing subcommittee. That's what I wanted. And lo and behold, I was blessed, and my colleagues feel comfortable enough in my abilities to make me the chair of that committee. And so I have very, very real and strong opinions about affordable housing. And when we put the Build Back Better proposal on the table, it contained the most significant amount of money for affordable housing in the history of the United States. And we have a lot of problems that we have to overcome. One of them is that there's a shortage of housing right now. Some of it is brought about by the supply chain issues that came up or the result of COVID. But a lot of them are that the housing prices have exploded. When you bring in lumber down from Canada and from the Northwest Washington State, and you can't get you can't get the wood across the country, that means the prices of wood is going to skyrocket, which means that the prices of new houses are going to skyrocket. And then when you add that we bring a lot of material from Europe and from Southeast Asia that we use in building our houses, it's almost gotten out of reach now. But we had to strengthen the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, and because most of the people who are over 50 years old, I'd say 55 years old, probably had their houses financed through FHA. And FHA had, by the time I went to Washington, the FHA was only a shadow of what it had been. And so we've been able to repair the FHA and put significant dollars into that budget that now is one of the strongest agencies in Washington, and it has a less than 5% default rate. And so we are doing some things, but that I don't want to give anybody the belief that I think the housing problem has been repaired. It hasn't. We have a lot to do. And even on public housing, for example, Richard Nixon way back helped to implement a program where no additional units of public housing could be built. So we, for the last 30 years, we've had a policy in Washington, we can only do 1-for-1 replacement. In other words, no new public housing units, no 202 projects, senior citizen, none of that. But we could do 1-for-1 replacement. In other words, like in New Orleans, as soon as Katrina hit, Maxine Waters, Al Green, and two Republicans, we went down to look at the damage in Mississippi and in Louisiana, mainly in New Orleans. It destroyed some public housing in New Orleans, but we couldn't go back and rebuild a whole new unit. We could only replace those that have been damaged and those that now we're experiencing the mildew and so forth. Well, we're getting those policies out of the way. I will be introducing legislation next week, which will redefine community development block grant dollars, which come into cities that are supposed to be used to perform urban development. And so we're going to use most of those dollars in housing. And I think it's also important for me to say that if we do the Build Back Better, and I don't think it's dead yet, it is not going to be 4.3 trillion as we had hoped. It'll probably be 1.5 trillion, maybe 2.
Which is still significant, you know.
Yes, I mean, when we did the stimulus package under President Obama, when we had the economic collapse of 2008, that was an $800 billion program, and we did all kinds of things all around the country, and even here in Kansas City with the Green Impact Zone. I'm sitting here now, on Brush Creek, Blue River, and we did homes. We put furnaces in new homes throughout the area, just on the north side of Brush Creek, and sidewalks and all kinds of things with 800 billion. So we're talking about $1 trillion. We're talking about a mammoth project, and a great portion of that is affordable housing. We got to do something, for example, at Parade Park. That was the nation's first housing co-op, and now it's in disrepair. About half the units are not habitable. And so one of my goals is before I leave the chairmanship, we may not be able to have had it rebuilt completely, but we'll start on salvaging Parade Park.
Congressman, in the chat, someone asked about an issue you probably hear a lot about. President Biden promised to issue relief on student loans. What can be done to help give millions of borrowers to relief on student loans across the country, and what is Congress doing about it?
I think that's going to happen. You have to. I mean, you don't have to, but we had assumed that we the Democrats would win the House, and we would have maybe 55, 56 members. Well, it turned out that we would only have 50. And so a lot of the things we want done, it's difficult to do because we don't have the votes. And I don't think most people, take that into consideration. If you don't have the votes, if I didn't have the votes, there would have been no Martin Luther King Park when I was mayor. There wouldn't have been 18th and Vine. There wouldn't have been a Brush Creek. There wouldn't have been a American Road. I mean, you got to have the votes. And so a lot of the things like the Voting Rights Act, which I know where the president stands, we can't do because we don't have the votes. And now in the Senate, we at least can get some things through if we get all of the Democrats, and then the Vice President, Kamala Harris, can break the tie, as the president of the Senate. But we have to have all of the Democrats. And as I think everybody knows, we've had 2 Democrats who have not embraced the president's agenda.
So is there anything he can do on student loans through executive order, or is that not possible either?
Well, I think that here's the problem with the executive order. I believe, based on what some of the attorneys are telling us in Washington, that the president can do it with executive order. The problem is that an executive order can be undone if Biden loses the next election, or if he doesn't run and another president comes in and doesn't like it. it's back to where it used to be. So I would prefer to get it done, because I mean, all it's going to do is create some financial hardship if people have you know a life where they think that they don't have to worry about paying back student loans, and they wake up one morning and they have $60,000 in loans. And so I know the president wants to do it. His wife is a professor at a community college, and she was one of the forces behind the writing of that commitment in the platform for her husband. So, and then I've had people will say, well, you know, Lyndon Johnson beat up people and made them vote for the civil rights legislation. And he, no question about it, he's the most consequential civil rights president in our history. He's done more than anybody. And then maybe Harry Truman would probably come in second. But, you know, back in those days, you know, Johnson could call up Representative Jerome McGee and say, all right, Brother McGee, you know, I really love you. But if you don't vote for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that bridge you wanted down there on Brush Creek, I'm not going to give it to you. You can't have it. And that's what he did. And that's how he got all that controversial legislation across: the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Act. He put the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, made it a real thing. It was actually started by Richard Nixon. But if a president did that today, he'd go to federal prison. You can't do that now. And so you have to cajole and try to convince people that it's it's in the best interest of their political careers and the nation's existence. So it's really tough.
No, you're absolutely right, Congressman, because one of the things that, you know, they've documented is, you know, on the, you know, when presidents leave office, and, you know, I know prior to Nixon, they would have those taping systems. And, you know, he's even talking to Everett Dirksen, you know, saying, hey, if you vote for this, those federal judgeships you want in Illinois, I can make it happen. I mean, he's promising judgeships at some point, you know, so you're very much right. Yeah, you would end up in jail today. So,
yeah, we couldn't do it. We can't do it. I mean, you can, you're just going to go to jail. Yeah. And so, you know, the president is trying to do everything he's done. And miraculously, we got the infrastructure bill, which is going to have great benefit for us in the community. I just left the Port Authority to try to get here in time for this, where we're going to try to create a port down there that will be able to do barge traffic, which is shipments down the Missouri River, which brings millions and millions of dollars into Kansas City. So we're gonna do a lot of things with rebuilding highways, and I've got some projects that I'm going to do in Kansas City. You know, with the money, we're going to do a sustainable corridor running from Sugar Creek, Independence, through Kansas City and into Kansas City, Kansas, with roads and new roads and bridges, free bus transportation, and a lot of other things I won't take time to mention right now. But we're going to do some things. But what happens is that African Americans, and nobody's put this into our history books, for whatever reason, maybe it's in African DNA, I don't know. We don't vote in the off-year elections. And so when you don't vote in the off-year elections, you impact still what happens if a president that you want wins. Because in many chances, that president has a hostile House or a hostile Senate, and they can't get their agenda through. And that's, the president of the United States cannot introduce legislation. The president can come to me and say, Cleaver, I want you to introduce this affordable housing bill. And that's how it gets done, but he can't do it. We have to take up the slack at it, but it doesn't matter, because we in the House, we are only about 9 votes ahead, and that means problems.
You know, Congressman, I saw last week on Meet the Press, the president's been getting a lot of heat for promising to nominate an African American woman to the Supreme Court. And many of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying that that is discrimination and that is a form of affirmative action. Can you talk a little bit about that and that promise that the president made to the Black community about promising to support a African American woman to be on the United States Supreme Court?
Well, I don't curse, and nobody who listens to this has ever heard me use a curse word. My wife has never heard. My children, I don't do it. But I wanted to hire somebody to cuss somebody out a few weeks ago in Washington when they started trying to talk about this was affirmative action. It's important for people to know that Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, had made a pledge that he would appoint a woman to the Supreme Court. Nobody said anything. He wasn't a bad human. But as soon as Biden said he wanted to appoint an African American woman, people started pulling out their hair and deciding that this was some kind of racist move by Biden. I'm celebrating it. I think that we have capable, qualified African Americans like we do everywhere else. We have two Latino females on the court. I think we have an opportunity to get African American, and frankly, I think the African American community ought to start looking at Biden and his record on issues of race as possibly putting him in the same league with the likes of Truman and maybe even Johnson, because he hasn't held back on any of those things that he has promised that he could things that he can get done legislatively. If we can get two runaway members of the Senate to come with us, there's no telling. I mean, the Voting Rights Act is critically important, and why can't we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? Two Democrats, one from West Virginia, one from Arizona.
Congressman, we interviewed our founder, Frank Ellis, last week, and he talked about the start of the health center and the expansion of the health center. And he really talked about how you were instrumental as a city councilman and as mayor to expanding SWOPE and expanding SWOPE services. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, when SWOPE first got started, they were in the basement at Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church, which is the church to which Frank belonged. And as pastor, Reverend Wallace Hartsfield, as everybody knows, it would automatically be open to that. And so as time moved on, the center would, add one building and then started trying to raise money for what is there now. And then Kit Bond, one of my political allies, and he did it in the House, in the Senate, I did it in the House. We were able to get money to help with that building that everybody sees now. And one of the problems we have, I'm always afraid, is that one of these days people will forget that Frank Ellis, worked to get that new building constructed, and that some of us played, a lesser role, but we also were able to help get money into this new building over here, which is probably matchless around the country. I don't think you have a community health center that matches Swope Park in the United States of America. And we ought to feel proud about that. And we ought to always remember the people who were critically important in getting it done. We had to get, at the time, community development dollars, CDBG money for Swope Park way back in the day. And then I had to do Brush Creek. The last thing you needed was for us to build this over here with that ugly Brush Creek that was there, which probably most of the people who are viewing this probably don't even remember. We're probably too young to even remember how ugly it looked. And so we've been able to get that done. And frankly, if we are able to get the federal budget through Congress, I have money as an earmark to put another bridge over Brush Creek so that we don't have to, so kids can cross over and not worry about being hit by cars. And so I have money for a bridge to be built to the park that we were able to get named Martin Luther King in 1977, and that Mahomes put money into for a lot of new playground equipment. And we want kids to be able to cross those busy streets without having to go through traffic. They go over the traffic. So we're still trying to make all the dreams come true, including the dreams that Frank Ellis had.
Congress, we're going to wrap up here. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this hour. One last question. You know, you have had a historical career, and being a councilman, a pastor, and on the political side, your first Black mayor, second Black congressman. And I'm going to make you make a choice here. So, and I'm not going to throw your time as a pastor because that's no competition. But if you had to choose it all over again, would you run for a third term as mayor or as another term as our congressman?
No, I would never run for a third term as mayor of Kansas City. We've only had one person who's done a third term, and that was Dick Berkeley. And I think, 8 years, I really truly believe this. 8 years is enough for a person to fulfill his or her promises to the public. And I said to people, if I win, we're going to save what was called at the time Liberty Memorial. Now it's called the World War I. It's called World War I because we were able to get it changed. For whatever reason, the federal government never built a World War I monument in Washington, D.C. There's a monument to everything in Washington except World War I. And so the World War I monument for the whole world is on a hill just to the west of Swope Park Health Center. It's now the World War I museum and memorial. But the point is, I think there are a lot of things that we can do in that position. I think I was able to get a lot of those things done, and I was ready to move. Even if there had been a third term, I wouldn't have run. And I had no plan on running for Congress. I had my own radio show on NPR. I was back pastor the church and building this new building. I was able to go around and do speeches around the country. I mean, I was happy. And so when I talked to one of my friends, Bill Worley, one of my big supporters, Doc Worley, he said, Cleaver, you're on radio, you're making money speaking around the country. The church is being built and you're giving a lot of attention now. And did you wake up one morning and say, now, how can I mess that up? And then you came to the conclusion, well, I can mess it up. Let me run for Congress. So, I ran for Congress. I was recruited. My predecessor, Congresswoman Karen McCarthy, asked me to run in her seat. And then Ike Skelton started lobbying me, and then Pelosi and Hoyer and Jim Clyburn. And that's when I finally entered. They all lied to me about the time it would take. But, they're going to have to answer to the Lord one day.
Well, Congressman, I want to thank you so much for doing this hour with us and all you've done for Swope Health and all you continue to do for this community. Thank you for this time. Thank you for your service. And any last words?
Well, I want people to feel good about working at what I consider to be the top health center, community health center in the country. And that's not hyperbole based on the fact that this is where I live. I think it has risen to that level. And if you bring in Danny Davis, Congressman Danny Davis from Chicago, who's considered the father of community health centers, he'll tell you that we passed Chicago. And so I hope people are excited about it. And I'm excited that your expertise that's coming from the political arena is being used because I think that always helps to do great work at historic institutions like this. When we're all long and gone, this will still be here. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to people related to the health center and of course getting a chance to talk with you as well.
Thank you, Congressman Cleaver. Until we talk again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for joining in.